Foreign Secretary, on your tour of European capitals, are you presenting the government's Brexit plan as a take it or leave it?
No, but it is a framework on which I believe the ultimate deal will be based. And I've been to 7 countries now. I've met 15 foreign ministers, and I'll be meeting a lot more in the weeks ahead. And I think what is interesting is that there are some early signs of real pragmatic engagement in that white paper plan, the plan proposed at Chequers. I think everyone recognises that the UK is going to go on playing a very important role in Europe, if not in the institutions of the EU. People are very concerned to avoid no deal by accident. And I think I'm getting a very strong sense, not just in Holland, but in many of the other countries I've visited, that actually people do want to engage seriously to try and find a way through and to try and get a pragmatic outcome.
Is it possible to say yet where the scope for sensible negotiation may lie?
I think it is. I mean, I think we're getting a lot of questions about some of the details. What we proposed is a model which means that we don't have to have customs borders between the UK and the EU. That's a very good thing for the UK, but it's a very good thing for the EU as well, because they sell a lot of products into the UK. But people want to know how the customs arrangements would work for products that arrived in the EU through the UK, how they make sure that there isn't abuse of those kinds of systems if the UK had different tariff levels. So we have lots of discussions on those issues, and what we're looking for is a win-win, because what will work is a system where businesses can carry on benefiting from selling their products in the UK and in Europe, very much as they do now, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Now, in Brussels, of course, there's huge scepticism about the complexity of our customs plan. Are you getting the same concerns when you see foreign ministers?
I think where there's a will, there's a way. And of course, there are going to be complexities in any agreement that we come to with the EU. But the great advantage of what we're proposing is that it solves the problem of Northern Ireland, where no one wants to put up a kind of hard border. That's been one of the big things the EU has asked us to think about. It's something that Theresa May is personally very committed to solving. But what it also means is that we can have frictionless trade in products for the whole of the UK, and that is very important to businesses up and down the country. So I'm certain we can solve these issues, but of course they're right to ask questions, and that's why we need to have these detailed discussions.
How great for you is the risk that what you call the mistake of no proper negotiated deal becomes the reality?
Well, the message I'm giving is very simple, that this is about the future of Europe as much as the future of the UK. And if we don't end up with a deal, of course there'll be a difficult period we have to get through, but the UK in the end would find a way to prosper and thrive, as we have done so many times in our history. But it would be a huge geostrategic mistake. This is a period where the world is increasingly unstable. We have chemical weapons attacks in Salisbury, in our own country, by opportunistic powers like Russia. There's a very changing global situation. This is a situation when countries with similar values need to be standing together on the world stage. And we want a deal with the EU that means that we really can have a deep and special partnership, a friendship going forward, not just in terms of our economic relations, but in terms of everything else that happens on the world stage. And it would be a mistake that we would regret for generations if we were to see a fissure, if we had a messy, ugly divorce. And that's what we all want to avoid.
And just to be clear though, are you therefore saying to your opposite numbers, give us a decent trade deal, or you won't get the kind of security cooperation we all need?
No, what I'm saying is that economic relations are inevitably at the heart of all relations. And what we've proposed is a plan that allows us to continue to trade freely with the EU countries, very much as we do now. We think that's good for the EU and it's good for Britain as well. But that means that we can develop that friendship with European countries if we have a very messy divorce which causes problems on both sides of the channel, then inevitably that will change British attitudes to Europe, and we don't want that to happen.
Now, you say that no deal would be a mistake. Do you think that implies that were we in that situation, the government would have to put back to the British people the question of whether to leave?
No, I think that would be an absolutely fatal mistake, because we have had our democratic debate on the referendum. People have made their decision. We're one of the oldest democracies in the world. If we had another referendum...
Even if it's a messy no deal, you don't think there's a case for what some people call a people's vote, another referendum?
Well, we had a huge debate, including a debate about the prospect of a messy deal ahead of the referendum. People made their decision, and I think if we went back to them, they would just say, look, we gave you your instructions, you're the elected politicians, get on with it.
Now, some people in Brussels, some officials in Brussels, apparently believe that we're bugging their meetings. You're in charge of MI6. Are we bugging Brussels meetings?
Well, you know that Foreign Secretaries never comment on intelligence matters, but you're a journalist, Robert, and you don't have any trouble getting to find out what's going on in those meetings in Brussels, just as you don't have any trouble finding out what's going on in those meetings in London, and that's the world we live in open society.
So it's just Brussels hysteria, is it?
Well, you know, I think you as a journalist understand very well how people find out these kinds of information.
There are two issues with Ireland, and Ireland is being discussed in negotiations as we speak. One is the long-term plan for keeping the border open, and the other is the so-called backstop until any long-term arrangements can be put in place. Is there any scope for the UK to agree what the rest of the EU apparently wants, which is a separate arrangement for Northern Ireland, even for a temporary period?
Well, I think Theresa May has been absolutely clear that no British Prime Minister, not her, nor any British Prime Minister, could agree to an arrangement that created a customs border inside the United Kingdom, because that would be to break up the United Kingdom. So that's not going to happen.
That's a red line.
That is absolutely a red line, and she couldn't have
even for a backstop.
She'd been absolutely clear about that. But I think what this backstop debate illustrates is that you can't really decide the terms of a withdrawal agreement without also looking at the future partnership. Now, the Chequers proposals actually solve the problem of a hard border in Northern Ireland. You don't need one if you adopt those proposals, and that's why we made them, actually. That is why we made this very bold proposal, and that's why the EU needs to engage with them, because they really do address this problem. So if we can progress those proposals, and we understand there's going to be lots of questions about them, we will avoid the need for a hard border, and of course that has to be one of our most important priorities in these negotiations.
And then on the single market for goods, there are suggestions that the rest of the EU would be happy with our proposal if we were prepared forever to take their rules on social legislation, environmental legislation. Can we bend on that?
Well, I think what we are saying is that we are offering, first of all, to agree to follow a common rule book on all the issues that could create friction at a border, which could stop the free flow of products over a border. But we totally understand the need to have a level playing field. In any free trade agreement, you spend a lot of time...
And if they say environment and social legislation requires a level playing field, we could concede, do you think?
Well, I think we have to see what their proposal was, because some of those things can have an impact on the level playing field. Some of them are just social measures that sovereign countries choose to make, and I think we have to look at those proposals.
Now, the Prime Minister has trusted you with Brexit negotiations in a way that she didn't trust your predecessor, Boris Johnson. Why?
Well, I think it's Dominic Raab who is her man in Brussels doing these Brexit negotiations, but my job as Foreign Secretary...
But Boris Johnson was never sent out like the way you're going out and seeing foreign ministers and talking about Brexit. What's different about you from Boris Johnson?
Well, I think you can answer that question just as well as me, Robert, but what I would say is that I think the role of a Foreign Secretary in a situation like this is to go around European capitals and point out that the implications of not getting a deal are profound in terms of geostrategic relations, in terms of our diplomatic relations, in terms of our friendship and our cooperation with European countries across a whole range of areas. And if you look at the threats that we face in the world today, this is a time when countries with similar values need to be standing together. Next week I'm going to the United States for my first bilateral visit there, and I think that is equally true of the transatlantic relationship. We need to be working together with the United States on as many issues as we can, because this is a period where, really for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall, many people are starting to ask fundamental questions about the Western democratic liberal model, and all of us believe that that is fundamental, incredibly important, and countries that share those values need to be talking to each other and working together.
Now we're almost out of time, so two very quick ones. Boris Johnson, does he need diversity training?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, in a liberal society, people need to be able to say what they want, and they need to be able to say things that offend other people. That is part of what happens in countries which have free speech. But also political leaders need to be careful not to say things that cause divisions.
So to tip over onto the wrong side of the boundary?
So we have a process inside the Conservative Party that is happening, and we have to let that process happen, and they will no doubt make their conclusions known.
And then finally, when will we know whether or not we've got a deal?
Well, we are leaving the EU on the 29th of March next year. The reality is that you can't carry on discussions until the 29th of March, because whatever's agreed has to get through both the UK Parliament and the European Parliament. So sometime ahead of that is when you need to do it. Our objective is to do it at the October European Summit. As I say, I think we are getting some early signs of pragmatic engagement with the Prime Minister's proposals. So that's what we're hoping will happen.
But some would say that actually the Netherlands have made more preparation than we have for no deal. Does that mean we should be doing more preparation for no deal?
Well, we should be doing more, and we are doing more, and that's why this week we're publishing our blueprints for no-deal preparations across a whole range of areas. But it's very important that we are prepared for all outcomes. That was something that we discussed, I discussed this morning with Stef Blok, the Dutch Foreign Minister, and they're doing the same here. But we have to be prepared for that. We don't want that to happen, though, and I think with a fair wind, we will be able to get a deal, but there's a lot of work to do.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you.